Legacy thinking. That's what Brandon Walsh called me right before he fired me. 18 years of keeping their systems running, and some 38-year-old MBA with a TED Talk smile decides I'm the problem. My name's Ryan Sterling. I'm 54 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, I was the chief systems architect at Apex Financial Solutions. We processed $3.2 billion in transactions every month. Not bad for a guy who started out turning wrenches in a manufacturing plant back in Ohio. Brandon stood there in his $2,000 suit, looking like he just stepped out of a Silicon Valley pitch meeting. He'd been our CEO for all of 8 months, brought in by the board to modernize operations and accelerate digital transformation. That's corporate speak for make everything newer and shinier, regardless of whether it works. The morning light cut through those floor-to-ceiling windows in the executive conference room, casting long shadows across the mahogany table. I was sitting in my usual spot, third from the head, watching dust particles drift through the air like they had all the time in the world. I should have known something was up when I saw the other executives already seated. Lucas Harper, the CTO I'd trained from a junior developer, Scott Reynolds, the COO who'd relied on my crisis management during the 2019 security breach, Justin Cole, the CFO, who understood exactly how much money my architecture had saved this company. None of them would meet my eyes. "Ryan," Brandon began, his voice carrying that rehearsed warmth that made my skin crawl, "we need to discuss the future direction of our technology stack." I didn't say anything. When you've been around as long as I have, you learn to let people hang themselves with their own words. Give them enough rope, and they'll show you exactly who they are. He continued pacing near those windows like he was giving a presentation to investors. "The board and I have been conducting a comprehensive review of our technical infrastructure. Your contributions over the years have been significant." There it was, the pause before significant. In corporate speak, that pause is the equivalent of a death sentence. It means but is coming next, and whatever follows but is going to hurt. "However," Brandon said, turning to face me directly, "the industry landscape has evolved dramatically. Our competitors are leveraging cutting-edge cloud-native architectures, implementing microservices frameworks, deploying AI-driven solutions for real-time optimization. Your approach, while historically stable, represents legacy thinking that's constraining our ability to innovate and compete effectively." Legacy thinking. I'd built the system that kept this place running while our 3 biggest competitors crashed spectacularly on Black Friday last year. Their cutting-edge solutions couldn't handle the load, but our legacy architecture processed every single transaction without a hiccup. I'd designed the encryption protocols that passed every security audit since 2006. I'd created the failover systems that saved the company during the 2020 server crisis when half the internet went dark. But apparently, that was just legacy thinking. "You're firing me," I said. Not a question. "After 18 years in corporate America, you develop a sixth sense for these conversations." "We're restructuring the technical leadership team," he replied smoothly, like he'd practiced this speech in the mirror. "Your position is being eliminated as part of our digital transformation initiative. Of course, we'll provide a generous severance package, 6 months salary, full benefits continuation, and a positive reference for your next opportunity." I looked around the room one more time. These guys had been coming to me for answers for years. Emergency calls at 2 a.m. when the payment processing system started throwing errors. Weekend deployments when we needed to patch critical security vulnerabilities. Holiday mornings when some configuration change went sideways and millions of dollars in transactions were stuck in limbo. I was the guy they called when everything went to hell. The one who knew where all the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. The institutional knowledge that kept this company's digital heart beating. And now they just sat there, silent as tombstones. "When?" I asked. "Effective immediately," Brandon replied with surgical precision. "We'll need your access credentials, company devices, and ID badges. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. Clean, professional, efficient, like I was a malfunctioning piece of equipment being decommissioned." I stood up slowly, gathering my coffee mug and notebook. 18 years of 3 a.m. emergency calls, weekend deployments, and system saves that kept this company operational. 18 years of building something robust and reliable in an industry where move fast and break things had become gospel. All of it reduced to 2 words: legacy thinking. As I reached the door, my personal phone buzzed in my pocket. I never check messages during meetings, but something made me glance at the screen. It was an automated alert from a monitoring system I'd set up years ago, one that monitored the health of critical infrastructure components, one that nobody else knew existed because I'd built it as a personal backup to catch problems before they became disasters. The notification made my hand pause on the door handle. The encryption key rotation service was showing yellow status, not critical yet, but a warning that something needed attention within the next 72 hours. I looked back at the room full of executives who just decided they didn't need my expertise anymore, slipped the phone back in my pocket, and walked out the door. The hallway stretched before me like a tunnel. Each step echoed against polished marble floors that I'd walked across thousands of times. Morning meetings, late-night emergencies, weekend deployments when everyone else was home with their families. This building knew my rhythms better than most people did. Eyes tracked me from cubicles and glass offices as words spread through the building like wildfire. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Keyboards went silent. In corporate environments, news travels faster than light, carried on Slack channels and whispered exchanges by the coffee machine. I kept my pace steady, controlled. 18 years in this business builds a particular kind of composure. You learn to maintain your dignity even when the ground is shifting beneath your feet. At the security desk, a young woman named Nicole Patterson stood up too quickly, nearly knocking over her coffee. Her badge identified her as part of the new hiring wave from the last 6 months. She looked nervous, probably hadn't done many termination escorts before. "Mr. Sterling," she said, voice uncertain, "I've been instructed to. I have a box for your belongings." "I know," I said gently. "You're just doing your job. Nothing to apologize for." Relief washed across her face as she handed me a standard cardboard box, the kind reserved for departures. Inside, I would place the accumulated artifacts of 18 years. My collection of programming books, accumulated over decades of staying current with technology trends. The photo from the company holiday party 3 years ago, back when we still had those. My coffee mug that read, "There are only 10 types of people in the world, those who understand binary and those who don't." Jennifer had given me that for my birthday when I first started learning to code. I surrendered my access badge first. That piece of plastic had gotten me through every door in this building for nearly 2 decades. It felt lighter than it should have, considering how much of my life it represented. Then my company phone, encrypted and containing years of notes, architectural diagrams, and emergency contact lists. Not that it mattered, I could recreate most of that information from memory if needed. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were taking away my access to the systems I'd built, the documentation I'd created, the institutional knowledge I'd accumulated. But they couldn't take what was in my head. And they'd just made a very expensive decision based on the assumption that what was in my head wasn't valuable anymore. "Ryan." The voice came from behind me as I finished packing my personal items. I turned to see Lucas Harper approaching, looking like a man walking to his own execution. He'd been my protege once, back when he joined as a junior developer with more enthusiasm than experience. I'd spent countless hours teaching him the fundamentals of system architecture, showing him how to think about scalability, security, and reliability. "I just heard," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Brandon didn't consult me on this decision. I would have fought it if I'd known." "Would you have?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "Because you were sitting right there when he made the announcement. Didn't hear much fighting." He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know about where his loyalties really lay. "The board made the decision," he said finally. Brandon presented it as already determined. "Decisions are only determined until someone with authority questions them," I replied. "But you didn't question it, did you? Too busy protecting your own position." Lucas looked past me, toward the elevators and the infrastructure that hummed invisibly behind every wall in this building. The servers in the basement that processed millions of transactions daily. The network switches that routed data across the globe. The backup systems that ensured nothing ever got lost. All of it designed and implemented under my supervision. "Ryan, who's going to manage the core platform? The payment processing engine? The encryption protocols? The failover systems?" "That," I said, "is no longer my problem. You approved this restructuring by staying silent when it mattered." I could see him trying to formulate a response that would somehow absolve him of responsibility while keeping his own job secure. The mental gymnastics of corporate survival. "Please," he said finally, "let's go upstairs. We can talk to Brandon together, explain the risks of this transition. Maybe we can work something out. The risks were always there, Lucas, I interrupted. Every system has risks. The question is whether you understand them well enough to prevent them from becoming disasters. And based on this conversation, I'm guessing you don't. I picked up my box of belongings and headed for the exit. Behind me, I could hear Lucas calling my name, but I didn't turn around. Some bridges burn whether you want them to or not. Outside, the city moved with its usual indifferent momentum. Cars navigated traffic, people hurried along sidewalks absorbed in their own concerns, delivery trucks made their rounds. The world doesn't pause when your professional identity gets dissolved. It just keeps spinning, and you either find your footing or get left behind. I stood there for a moment, cardboard box under my arm, feeling the weight of 18 years settling on my shoulders. Not sadness exactly, and not anger either. Something clearer than both, a crystalline understanding of what came next. My personal phone rang before I'd even reached my car. Ryan Sterling, I answered. Mr. Sterling, this is Michael Thompson from Summit Financial Systems. We've been following your work for years. We understand you might be considering new opportunities. I almost smiled. The corporate grapevine moves fast in the fintech world. What makes you think I'm available? Industry sources, he replied diplomatically. Word travels quickly in our sector. We're building next-generation payment infrastructure, and we need someone who understands that innovation without stability is just expensive failure. That was the first intelligent thing I'd heard all day. Most companies chase the latest trends without understanding the fundamentals. They want to move fast and break things. But in financial services, breaking things means losing money, violating regulations, and destroying trust. Tell me about your current architecture, I said, unlocking my car but not getting in yet. Honestly, it's a mess, Michael admitted. We're processing about $500 million in daily transactions, but we're planning international expansion. Europe first, then Asia Pacific. Our current infrastructure keeps buckling under load testing. We tried migrating to microservices last year, thinking that would solve our scalability problems, but it just created new ones. Classic mistake. I'd seen it dozens of times over the years. Companies read about Netflix or Amazon's architecture in some tech blog and assume they can copy it without understanding the context. They think microservices are a silver bullet for all performance problems. Microservices aren't magic, I told him. They introduce complexity, distributed systems that are harder to debug, harder to secure, harder to maintain. If your monolith is failing, it's usually because of specific bottlenecks in your data layer or processing logic, not because the entire architectural approach is fundamentally wrong. Exactly what we needed to hear, Michael replied. We need someone who knows that newer isn't automatically better, someone who understands that in financial services, reliability trumps everything else. Can we schedule a meeting? We're prepared to offer a senior architect position with equity participation and complete technical authority over infrastructure decisions. Send me the details, I said. I'll review them and get back to you. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, engine off, watching the Apex building through my windshield. 18 years. I'd given them 18 years of nights, weekends, holidays, family dinners cut short by emergency calls. I'd missed my son's high school graduation because of a critical system failure that required my immediate attention. I'd canceled a vacation to Italy that Jennifer and I had been planning for months because of an unexpected security audit. I'd put this company's needs before my family's more times than I cared to count, and they'd just decided that was worth nothing. But here's what Brandon and his board didn't understand. When you eliminate institutional knowledge, you don't just lose a person. You lose decades of context, hundreds of small decisions that shaped how systems evolved, thousands of edge cases that were handled quietly before they could become problems. They thought they could replace experience with enthusiasm, wisdom with innovation. They were about to learn the difference between the two, and the education was going to be expensive. I started the car and drove to a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office, the kind with mismatched furniture and baristas who didn't try to upsell you on seasonal drinks. I ordered black coffee and found a table by the window where I could watch the city move, while my conversation with Michael Thompson continued via text. My personal laptop, not company property, never had been, contained something that Brandon's team was going to need very soon. A private server I'd maintained for my own projects, containing a folder labeled Apex Architecture Documentation. Everything was there. 18 years of institutional knowledge, every design decision, every trade-off, every hidden dependency that kept the systems running smoothly. The encryption protocols I'd designed specifically for financial compliance, the load balancing algorithms that distributed traffic in ways that standard commercial solutions couldn't match, the failover procedures that had saved the company during the 2020 infrastructure crisis when half the internet went dark, all of it documented in meticulous detail, stored on my own equipment, accessible only through my personal credentials. Because I'd learned early in my career that companies don't value knowledge until it's gone. I'd always planned to transfer this documentation properly when I eventually retired or transitioned to a new role. Maybe conduct training sessions over several months, ensuring smooth knowledge transfer. That opportunity had just been eliminated. What happens when you remove the person who understands not just how a system works, but why it was built that way? I suspected Apex was about to find out, and the lesson was going to cost them more than my annual salary. Much more. By the time I got home, it was late afternoon. The house felt too quiet, too empty. Jennifer was visiting her sister in Phoenix for the week, and both kids were away at college. Sarah at Northwestern studying engineering, Michael at Penn State in business. The bills for their tuition were a constant reminder that getting fired at 54 wasn't just about wounded pride. It was about real money, real responsibilities that didn't pause for corporate restructuring. I unpacked my cardboard box slowly, finding places for everything. The programming books went back on my shelf, accumulated over decades of staying current with evolving technology. The photo from the holiday party found its way to my desk. The binary coffee mug went into the kitchen cabinet where it belonged. Then I sat down at my home office and opened my email. 17 new messages had arrived since leaving the building. 3 from recruiters who'd somehow heard about my departure within hours. The fintech industry's grapevine moves at fiber optic speed. 2 from former colleagues expressing sympathy and outrage. 1 from some of the engineers I'd mentored over the years, asking if there was anything they could do. And 1 from Apex's legal department with the subject line severance agreement and post-employment obligations. I opened that one first. Standard corporate protection language. Non-compete clause limiting, where I could work for the next 12 months. Non-disparagement agreement preventing me from speaking negatively about the company. Intellectual property assignment confirming that everything I'd created during my employment belonged to Apex. I read it carefully, professionally. Here's what Brandon and his legal team had missed in their rush to sanitize my departure. Intellectual property assignment only covered work created during employment using company resources. My personal documentation, stored on my own servers, developed using my own equipment during my own time. That belonged to me. And they'd just lost access to all of it. At 6:30 p.m., I had a video call with Michael Thompson and the leadership team at Summit Financial. They were everything Apex wasn't: hungry, focused, willing to invest in getting things right rather than just getting things fast. Michael introduced me to their CTO, their head of compliance, their VP of operations. All of them asked intelligent questions, treated my experience as valuable rather than obsolete. "We want to build this correctly," Michael explained during the call. "Not quickly, not trendy, but correctly. Stable, secure, scalable. We'd rather take an extra 6 months and create something that lasts than rush to market with something fragile." That was the philosophy I'd tried to maintain at Apex for 18 years. The idea that in financial services, reliability matters more than speed, that security trumps convenience, that understanding your system's behavior under stress is more important than implementing the latest framework. "What's your timeline?" I asked. 18 months for full international deployment, their CTO replied, "but we want to start with a solid foundation. Complete architectural redesign based on our growth projections and regulatory requirements." By the time we finished the call, they'd made me an offer. Chief architect position, significant equity stake, complete technical authority over infrastructure decisions, and a mandate to build their systems the right way from the beginning. No shortcuts, no compromises, no pressure to use trendy solutions that weren't appropriate for the problem at hand. I accepted. That evening, as I prepared dinner in my quiet kitchen, I received a text message from Stephanie Clark, one of the junior engineers I'd mentored at Apex. She was smart, curious, one of the few people who actually listened when I explained the reasoning behind architectural decisions. "I don't know what's happening with the company," she wrote, "but I wanted to say thank you for everything you taught me. You made me a better engineer." I stared at that message for a long time. This had never been about punishing individuals who had no control over corporate decisions. People like Stephanie were just trying to build their careers, learn their craft, contribute something meaningful. The problem wasn't with the engineers or the individual managers. The problem was with an institutional mindset that treated expertise as disposable, that valued disruption over stability, that confused innovation with wisdom. I replied, keep learning, stay curious, and remember that experience isn't obsolete. It's just quiet until you need it. At 8:47 p.m., my phone rang. Lucas, Ryan, I need to ask you something. Go ahead. The encryption module for wire transfers. Where's the documentation for the key rotation protocol? I closed my eyes. The key rotation protocol was one of my most critical security implementations. Financial regulations required encryption keys to be rotated every 72 hours to prevent long-term cryptographic vulnerabilities. But the system I'd built was complex, with specific timing requirements, rollback procedures, and failover mechanisms that had to coordinate across multiple data centers. Should be in the main repository, I said carefully. I've looked everywhere. There's high-level documentation, but not the implementation details, not the edge cases or the recovery procedures if something goes wrong during rotation. Did you check the architecture wiki? Everything there is years old. You mentioned updating it, but I'd been too busy actually maintaining the systems to document every nuance for people who hadn't shown interest in understanding the complexity involved. I'd always planned to create comprehensive documentation when I had time, when the company invested in proper knowledge management resources, when someone asked the right questions. Lucas, I don't work there anymore, I said gently. You'll need to figure it out. Ryan, please, I know today was unfair, but the system still needs maintenance. People are depending on it. The system, I interrupted, will do exactly what it was designed to do. If you don't understand it well enough to maintain it properly, that's a decision Apex made when they eliminated my position. Long silence on the other end. I could almost hear the wheels turning, the realization dawning that they'd created a problem much bigger than they understood. You're really going to do this? He asked quietly. I'm not doing anything, I replied. I'm simply not available to fix problems for a company that decided my expertise was obsolete. You have talented engineers. You have consulting firms with fresh perspectives. Figure it out. The irony was perfect. They'd hired me 18 years ago because they needed someone who understood complex systems. They'd kept me for 18 years because those systems had grown more complex, not less. And now they'd fired me because they thought complexity was a problem that could be solved by switching to newer tools. They were about to learn that complexity doesn't disappear when you change tools. It just moves around, and if you don't understand where it went, it comes back to bite you when you least expect it. I hung up and sat in my kitchen, watching city lights flicker through the window. Tomorrow, I would start building something new, something better, something designed from the ground up with all the lessons I'd learned over nearly 2 decades. Tonight, I would let Apex discover what they'd really lost, when they decided experience was just legacy thinking. The education was about to begin. The first major incident occurred at 11:32 p.m. that same night. My phone started ringing, not my work phone, which was now sitting in some security drawer at Apex, but my personal device. I glanced at the screen and turned it off. Whatever was happening at Apex was no longer my problem. I went to sleep. The next morning arrived with a sense of inevitability. I woke at 5:30, made coffee, and checked the financial news on my tablet before looking at my phone. 3 major industry publications had already picked up the story. Apex Financial Experiences, major service disruption. Fintech platform faces unexplained outage. Payment processor down for 12+ hours. 12 hours. That was longer than I'd anticipated. Either they were being extremely cautious, or they were more lost than I'd realized. I turned my phone back on. 47 missed calls, 63 text messages, 21 voicemails. I didn't listen to any of them. Instead, I got dressed, drove to Summit Financial's offices, and began my first official day as their chief architect. The contrast was jarring. Where Apex had become bureaucratic and risk-averse, Summit was focused and decisive. Where Brandon had dismissed experience as obsolete, Michael Thompson treated it as their most valuable asset. We want to learn from other people's mistakes instead of making our own, Michael told me during our morning meeting. Build something that works reliably from day one, not something that breaks in interesting ways. That philosophy would have gotten you laughed out of most Silicon Valley boardrooms. In fintech, it was the difference between success and catastrophe. Around 10:30 a.m., my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mr. Sterling, this is Michelle Grant from Apex's Board of Directors. We need to speak with you urgently." Board level. The situation had escalated beyond Brandon's ability to contain. "I'm in the middle of my first day at a new position," I said. "Perhaps we can schedule something for next week." "Mr. Sterling, our entire platform has been down for 14 hours. We're losing millions of dollars per hour. Our clients are threatening to terminate their contracts. We need your help immediately." "What happened to Rise Advisory?" I asked. "The consulting firm with all those fresh perspectives and modern solutions? They've been working through the night. They can't resolve the core issues. And your internal team? Lucas is a capable CTO. They're missing critical information about the system architecture, security protocols, failover procedures, encryption configurations. Information that apparently wasn't documented in our standard repositories." "Why wasn't it documented?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Another pause. We're not entirely sure," I could have explained. Could have told her about years of budget requests for documentation resources that were denied, suggestions for hiring additional senior architects to provide redundancy that were shot down to save costs, proposals for comprehensive knowledge management systems that were deemed unnecessary overhead. Instead, I said, "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Come back temporarily, as a contractor. We'll pay whatever you want. I have a new position. I started today. I can't just abandon that commitment. Please, Mr. Sterling, we understand there were mistakes in how your departure was handled. But right now we have 300,000 employees who haven't received their payroll, and our payment processing failures could trigger regulatory investigations." Regulatory investigations. That was new information. The situation was worse than I'd thought. "What's your offer?" I asked. "Name your terms." I thought about it carefully. Not about the money, but about the message this would send to every company that treated experienced professionals as disposable commodities. $2,000 per hour, I said. Minimum 100-hour engagement, payment in advance. And I don't report to Brandon. I report directly to the board with final authority on all technical decisions during the engagement. That's $200,000 just for the retainer. "That's the cost of emergency expertise," I replied. "It's considerably less than what you're losing per hour in downtime, and probably a fraction of the regulatory fines you'll face if this continues much longer." Muffled conversation, hands over phones, urgent whispers in the background. "We accept your terms," Michelle said. "How soon can you start? I need to discuss this with my new employer. If they're willing to loan me out for this emergency, and that's a significant if, I could potentially begin tomorrow. But I want to be absolutely clear. This is a limited engagement to restore service and transfer knowledge. I'm not coming back permanently." "Understood. We'll have contracts drawn up immediately." After I hung up, I found Michael Thompson and explained the situation. To his credit, he listened without interrupting. "What do you want to do?" he asked when I finished. "Honestly, part of me wants to let them suffer the full consequences of their decision. They made a calculated choice that expertise was expendable. Now they're learning the real cost of that calculation." Michael nodded thoughtfully. But there are 300,000 people who need their paychecks. Client companies that depend on that platform. Employees at Apex who had nothing to do with the decision to fire me. "You know what this tells me about you?" Michael said. "You're exactly the kind of person we want leading our architecture. Someone who understands that systems serve people, not egos. Take the time you need to clean up their mess. Do it the right way. We'll be here when you're done." I spent the rest of the afternoon drafting a detailed contract with the help of a lawyer friend. The terms were explicit: full access to all systems, complete technical authority, no interference from Brandon or the consulting team, and a comprehensive knowledge transfer plan that would take a minimum of 4 weeks to execute properly. By 6 p.m., Apex's legal team had signed everything and wired the $200,000 retainer to my account. I drove back to the Apex building that evening. The parking lot was fuller than usual for 7 p.m. Clearly, the crisis had everyone working late. The building looked the same from the outside, but felt different. There was a tension in the air, a desperation that seemed to hum through the ventilation system. Lucas met me at the security desk. He looked exhausted, hollow-eyed, like he hadn't slept since our conversation the night before. "Thank you for coming back," he said quietly. I'm not back, I corrected. I'm here as a contractor to resolve a crisis and transfer knowledge, nothing more. He led me to the operations center, where half a dozen engineers were hunched over workstations, trying approaches that I could see were fundamentally misguided. Error messages scrolled across multiple screens. Status dashboards showed red alerts across every critical system. "Everyone stop," I said, not loudly but with unmistakable authority. The room went silent. Engineers looked up, some with relief, others with resentment at having their work interrupted. "I need to understand exactly what you've tried and what state the systems are in." Nobody touches anything until I've completed my assessment. One wrong command at this point could make the situation exponentially worse. For the next 4 hours, I conducted a forensic analysis of what had gone wrong and what well-meaning but uninformed attempts at fixes had made worse. The picture that emerged was exactly what I'd expected: cascade failure triggered by the encryption key rotation system, compounded by misguided attempts to bypass security protocols. The good news, I told Lucas around midnight, is that the data is intact. The bad news is that it's going to take at least 12 hours to restore full service, assuming nothing else goes wrong. "Can you do it?" he asked. I looked around the room at the engineers who'd been fighting this problem for nearly 20 hours, at the systems I'd spent 18 years building and refining, at the architecture that represented thousands of careful decisions made over nearly 2 decades. "Yes," I said. "But this time we're going to do it right. No shortcuts, no quick fixes, no bypassing security protocols because they're inconvenient. When we're done, you're going to have a system that not only works, but that you actually understand." By 6:15 a.m., the first systems came back online. By 8:30 a.m., transaction processing resumed. By 10:45 a.m., the delayed payroll finally completed, depositing paychecks that were now over 30 hours late. I stood up from the terminal, stretched my back, and turned to face the room full of engineers who'd watched me work through the night. "The immediate crisis is resolved," I said. "But if you think this was just a technical problem, you're missing the point. This was a failure of institutional knowledge management. Over the next 4 weeks, we're going to fix that permanently." The lesson had a price tag: $200,000 for my services, millions in lost revenue, damaged client relationships, and a regulatory investigation that would probably cost even more. But the real education was just beginning. They'd learned that expertise isn't obsolete, it's just invisible until it's gone. As I walked out of the building that morning, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and amber, I realized something important. This wasn't really a story about revenge. It was a story about value, the value of experience, the value of institutional knowledge, the value of understanding that some things can't be replaced with newer, shinier alternatives. Sometimes the most expensive lesson is the one that teaches you what you had all along. The real legacy isn't the code you write, it's the wisdom to know when not to write it at all.